something that is now coming to light more and more, and we discussed it yesterday on the broadcast, but now CNN is picking up on it. The left is picking up on it. Business reporters are picking up on it as well because it's the trend in the U.S. economy. And we told you about Jake Tapper from CNN, who, by the way, just so it's clear, as Will said, had tremendous praise immediately following the debate for Kamala Harris. So it wasn't like he was already, right after the debate, kind of scratching his head and going, hold on, everybody who thought this was so great. The problem is she didn't answer any of the questions that were key to the American people. So 24 hours, 48 hours later, you start thinking about it more, especially if one of your jobs is to analyze politics and to analyze this for the country. It is for us. That was actually the first thing that stuck out for me in the first question of the debate. I tweeted about it because if you start with your answers that way, you kind of know how the night is going to go. And what she did, the strategy she went for, and I'm not saying it's a strategy that doesn't work in debates. It can work in debates. It can work in court cases. She had 5 or 6 main points she wanted to make throughout the night. She had memorized all of them. Some were digs at Trump. Some were statements on the economy and other issues. And she kept going back to those. It really didn't matter what the question was. The question might direct her to what she had memorized, and then she went with that statement. So I want you to listen to a Jake Tapper who was praising Harris immediately after the debate to the Jake Tapper of yesterday. Take a listen.
Vice President Harris began the debate by punting the first question on the economy.
Do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid, and I am actually the only person on this stage who has a plan that is about lifting up the middle class and working people of America.
It went on from there. Despite the economy being the number one issue facing the country, the sitting vice president generally reverted to talking points about a few of her policy proposals. Even Harris allies today are saying that she needs to talk more about what she will do for Americans if elected. Senator Bernie Sanders will be here in a second to talk about more about the need for her to fill in some of those blanks. On the border, another vulnerable issue for Harris, she also dodged.
Would you have done anything differently from President Biden on this?
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings.
Okay, that wasn't the question. When asked how she would break through the Israel-Hamas war stalemate, Harris said this.
We need a ceasefire deal and we need the hostages out. And so we will continue to work around the clock on that.
Okay, but again, how?
So again, a lot of statements about what they want to see happening, the end goal, but no how, or just completely ignoring the question. I want to go to Harry Hutchinson, who's our director of policy at the ACLJ, because Harry, there's also an interesting breakdown in consumer prices that has come out in the last 24 hours that compare kind of the Biden era with the Trump era just 4 years ago. And they start off, of course, which is critical to families everywhere, which is something we all need to survive, food. And they start with those prices. Let's walk through some of those for people because the numbers are extreme.
Absolutely. So food prices have risen by 23% during the Biden-Harris regime. Egg prices are up by 61%. Since August of 2020, gasoline prices are up by 50%. Shelter prices are up by 23.4%. Energy prices overall are up by 42%. New vehicle prices are up by 19.5%. Mortgage interest prices have tripled during the Biden-Harris regime. So there's no wonder why Kamala Harris dodged the question whether or not Americans were better off after 3.5 years of the Biden-Harris regime. A truthful answer would have impeached Kamala Harris. So in other words, the American people are much, much worse off after 3.5 years of the Biden-Harris regime, whereas under Trump, the economy delivered a 15% increase in real wages for American workers. So it's an easy question to answer, but of course, Kamala could not answer the question truthfully.
Well, and Professor Hutchison, I feel like that is the question why they led the debate with the economy question is because that is the most important question for everyday Americans. And when you look at the growth of wages, which has been relatively stagnant, around 4% or less over these last 3.5 years, and you compare that to the consumer price rising, individuals that are working hard, have a steady job, and are getting moderate income increases through raises or cost of living adjustments. Nowhere are you seeing cost of living adjustments that are approaching over the last 3 and 4 years at 23% for shelter, 60% for some food items, 20% for the majority of food items. So the factor in all of these price increases with meager rising wages for the individuals, they may be able to point to numbers like job numbers or, look, we got inflation back down to 2-point-something% this last month when that's down from the peak of 9%. But what you're seeing in reality is that, one, the prices aren't going to go down. They've already been inflated. But individuals that are working hard, their ability to tread water in an economy is getting more and more precarious for them as prices for things like shelter, vehicles, gasoline, basic necessities in the American economy are becoming increasingly out of reach as their wage rises don't meet the price rises.
I think you're precisely correct. So I think the essential point is elites like Kamala Harris don't really care about average Americans. Indeed, they disdain the lives of average Americans, whether they live in Springfield, Ohio, whether they live in a suburb of Detroit in Michigan, whether they live in a fracking community in Pennsylvania. At the end of the day, Kamala Harris and the elites that run the Biden-Harris regime don't care. So the people that have done really well, they are supporting Kamala Harris. So you have billionaires who are supporting Kamala Harris. They have done very, very well. In fact, if you look at the top of the stock market, many of these companies have seen their market value triple over the last 3 to 4 years. So these rich individuals are indeed supporting the Kamala Harris regime. And if I were a billionaire, I might have some self-interest in supporting Kamala Harris, even though her economic and other policies are absolutely awful.
You know, it's interesting. We got some phone calls on this, Will. Do we have time to get to the first call of the day?
Yeah, let's go to Helen calling from Arizona on line 1. Helen, you're on the air.
Hey, Helen.
I think that Trump should have another debate on Fox News where he can get a fair chance at it.
You know, I think Helen, going through all these points that we have, even what Jake Tapper went through, I saw Trump in the news just speaking to reporters, candidly, which Harris never does, about whether or not he would do a second debate. And there was one, I think, on the table from NBC, and there's also one on the table from Fox. He said he would do NBC, he would also do Fox. I don't recall yet if he said it has to be Fox first, or if we do Fox, I would also do NBC. But he's willing to continue on. Harris was the first to call for a debate. Usually, if you're calling for another debate, even if you think you had a good performance, you think that you've still got a lot of ground to make up in the campaign. The question is, would Harris ever do what Republicans have to constantly do, Will, which is walk into debates that are moderated by former Democrat staffers, including even the CNN debate with Jake Tapper. He was a former Democrat staffer on Capitol Hill before joining the news. And these very, one-sided anchors like we saw with the ABC. Republicans do it all the time. But it's hard for me to imagine right now, and maybe that changes, Harris doing a Fox News debate.
That's right. She would never agree to what Republicans would agree to, which is to walk into the lion's den. That's why her first and probably only sit-down interview was with a friendly network, CNN. And even that was probably a little too tough for her when you look at how spoon-fed she was by the ABC moderators that we saw the other night. We'll see if there's another debate. I think when it all shakes out, it'll be interesting if there is another one.